Hi everyone, welcome to week 5, consequence strategies. We're going to cover reinforcement, token systems, and then progress monitoring in this presentation. So just a brief review, last presentation we talked about the necessary components that all positive behavior support plans must have. You have to have antecedent strategies that decrease the motivation to engage in problem behavior in the first place. So those are your prevention strategies. You have to have what you're going to teach the student that replaces the problem behavior. So those are the replacement behaviors or replacement skills. And then the other necessary component in every behavior plan are the consequence strategies. And that's what this presentation is going to focus on. So if you remember back in the beginning, we talked about how important it is to focus on the behaviors that we want to see increasing just as much as the behaviors that we want to see decreasing with our students. So every behavior plan in the consequence section, and later, I think at the end of the course, I'm going to give you an example behavior plan that's embedded in IEP and in an IEP and IEP writer, and you'll see that there's 2 C sections or 2 consequence sections. So one of those has to address what are you going to do as the teacher when problem behavior does not occur. So when a student engages in the appropriate replacement behavior or other appropriate behaviors, we want to reinforce. Very important. Remember the definition of reinforcement. It's a process that increases the future probability of that behavior happening again. So it's extremely important that we reinforce the behaviors we want to see occurring more often. And it's very important also to remember differential reinforcement. And that simply means providing more or better reinforcement for better behaviors. So let's say you have a student who often engages in problem behavior, and during your lesson, they don't really engage in much problem behavior. They're not cooperating or, actively engaged the best, but it's better than before. You still want to reinforce that. Then let's say the next day they come in and they're really doing well. They are actively engaged. They're responding appropriately. You want to differentially reinforce that. Give more or better reinforcement when you see them behaving better. So still talking about consequence strategies, what to do if problem behavior does not occur. So we're still focusing on this reinforcement. Important reminders. What is reinforcing for one person is not reinforcing for another. It is very student specific. It's vital to determine what serves as reinforcers for specific students. And keep in mind how we talked about in previous presentations that this may change over time. So what works for a student, in the morning may be totally different than what works in the afternoon. So it may change day to day or even within the same day. So we have to be very aware of that. Oftentimes I'll hear teachers say, oh, I tried, positive reinforcement, it doesn't work. By definition, positive reinforcement will increase the good behaviors. So if it's not working, then you're not using the right reinforcers, and that's really important to do. So how do we find the best reinforcers for our students? Well, we can carefully observe the student. What do they gravitate towards? What do they talk about? What do they like? We can ask the student. If we have students who do have language skills, who can express what they like, then we can just ask them. We can ask parents and or the previous teachers. We can ask the parents at home, when your child is at home, what do they like to do? What are their favorite things? And then we can talk to previous teachers as well. And then there are ways to formally assess what types of reinforcers will work as well. So as I mentioned before, in your positive behavior support plan, there's a consequence section for consequence strategies. And in this section of the plan, you must include that when the student demonstrates the replacement skills or appropriate behaviors, those skills or behaviors will be positively reinforced. And you want to provide immediate and differential reinforcement so that the appropriate behaviors will increase. So that has to be included in the behavior plan. And because it's in the IEP and part of the plan, then all staff working with the student need to remember that. It is extremely important for the success of the plan. So that brings us to our first ASR question. When the student engages in the replacement behavior, the appropriate behavior, what should we do? A, Positively reinforce the appropriate behavior with a reinforcer the student values. B, do nothing. C, punish the behavior. Or D, say, good job. And the answer is A, positively reinforce the appropriate behavior with a reinforcer the student values. This is a little bit tricky because, saying good job, which was letter D choice on the previous slide, yes, you may want to provide some verbal praise, and that is important, but a lot of our kiddos could care less about verbal praise. So what we have to go with first is what they value, what's reinforcing to them, and then we want to pair the verbal praise and specific praise about what they did with the delivery of those other reinforcers. Now, if you do have a kiddo who loves just your attention and verbal praise, then go with that, but the best answer is A, using a reinforcer that student values. All right, so now we're going to cover the consequence strategies for what to do when problem behavior does occur. So again, we really want to focus on prevention and the antecedent strategies to prevent that problem behavior from happening, but it may still happen. So we need to know what to do if it does. And this has to be included in the positive behavior support plan. So when a student engages in behaviors targeted for reduction, meaning the problem behavior, do not allow the behaviors to contact reinforcement. This is our extinction procedure. Remember the definition of extinction. A previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforced, and then the behavior fades. So it's critical to avoid reinforcing problem behavior when it occurs. Remember, if a behavior is continuing to occur, it's being reinforced somehow, somewhere. So this brings us to our ASR number 2 question. In the consequence section of the behavior plan, the plan must include an extinction component, which means A, reinforcing the problem behavior, B, not allowing the problem behavior to contact reinforcement, C, punishing the problem behavior, or D, giving extra attention to the problem behavior. And the answer is B, not allowing the problem behavior to contact reinforcement. That is the extinction part of the behavior plan in the consequence section. So now we're going to get into specific consequence strategies that are based on the function of problem behavior. Just like we did with the specific antecedent strategies and specific replacement behaviors, these will be determined based on your FBA, your functional behavior assessment, that came up with a hypothesized function of problem behavior. So these consequence strategies have to be specific to the function, or functions if there's more than one, and also specific to the students. So if your FBA determined that the function of problem behavior is socially mediated positive reinforcement, meaning the student is engaging in problem behavior to gain access to or to maintain access to desired items, activities, and or attention. These would be some consequence strategies that you would use. You would not allow access to the desired items, activities, or attention. You may have to physically block this access. This might mean, and it depends on the age of your students, the size of your student, their ability level, a lot of things, but these are just the types of things you need to consider. So you may have to physically put yourself between the student and the thing that they want as they're engaging in the problem behavior. Or you may have to put some sort of other type of barrier between it, or basically just move the thing out of reach. That's often one of the easiest things. If a student is engaging in problem behavior to access the iPad, for example, then you might just put it up high in a cabinet or somewhere where they can't get it while they are engaging in that problem behavior. And very important to not provide attention to the problem behavior. And I put attention in quotes because we're going to focus a little bit more on that attention piece on the next slide. So when we say we don't want to give attention to problem behavior that in the past has maintained by attention, that doesn't necessarily mean that we completely ignore the problem behavior. We may still have to address the problem behavior in some way, but we want to avoid showing any reactions like changes in voice, facial expressions, talking about the problem behavior to others in front of the student. And basically, we just have to be very good actors and actresses. Even though problem behavior may be extremely bothersome to us and upsetting us very much, a lot of our students are engaging in the problem behavior to see that reaction from us. A lot of students yelling at them, reprimanding them, it doesn't work to punish the behavior. And we talked about this before. It actually reinforces the behavior because that's what they're after. They're after our attention. So we have to be very, very careful. Even if it isn't our attention that they want, even if it's, a toy that another student has, or a peer's attention, the attention of their peers, we have to be very cautious not to add our own extra attention to that, because that may accidentally reinforce the problem behavior. So we need to use a calm, neutral voice and expression. Avoid any extra comments or dialogue. And again, too, a lot of times when students and all people are in a heightened state of escalation, a lot of times, telling them to calm down or adding lots and lots of directions or comments can make it worse. So you kind of want to remain as calm as possible. Do not allow access to the reinforcement, and maybe just even back away. And you want to wait for calm, or you can prompt an incompatible response. So, for example, some of our younger students who have, climbing and running and grabbing behaviors to get the things that they want, we have taught them ready hands, which just means interlocking their fingers and almost like a prayer position, but their fingers are interlocked. If that has been so practiced during times of calm that we say, show me ready hands, they automatically engage in that. If they're engaging in that, then they can't be hitting or they can't be grabbing for things. So we can prompt some sort of incompatible response or just wait for the calm. And once the student has been calm or complied with the incompatible response and calm for at least a 5 counts, maybe a little longer, depending on the student, we want to prompt the appropriate way to ask for what they want. Oftentimes, these students we work with, they may be seeking attention or seeking things that they want just because they really don't have the skill of how to ask for it appropriately. So in the middle of their problem behavior, we don't prompt that. We kind of wait for calm, and then we'll say, I can tell you want my attention. What would be a better way to get my attention or a peer's attention? Or, to ask for using the computer or something. And then we would tell them how to do that. Then once they imitated or responded in the appropriate way, we would reinforce a small amount with the item or attention they wanted. Again, that's where that differential reinforcement comes in. If they asked appropriately the first time without all the problem behavior, they could have the reinforcer for more or more amounts. If the item or attention is not available for some reason, we would follow these same procedures, but then you would have to offer an alternative of some sort. If a student really wants the iPad, but another student is using it, then, you block access to the iPad. You don't allow them to have it while they're engaging in problem behavior. Wait for calm, put a pause in there, and then you could say, can't have the iPad, but you may have the computer. Something like that instead. But again, only for a small amount because they did engage in problem behavior to access it. Very important to put that break in there once they're calm or once they're engaging in the incompatible behaviors. So what do we do if the FBA has determined that the function is socially mediated negative reinforcement, meaning the student is engaging in problem behavior to avoid, escape instructional demands or other directives, including transitions? So here are some consequence strategies. You do not want to remove the demand. And this is really, really hard for teachers to do. And I encourage the teachers I work with who work with these kids at a very early age that this is the time to work on this. Because once they're, middle school, high school, it's harder to do this. So we need to nip this in the bud when they're young. A lot of our kids in the past, those who have developmental delays, autism, other, emotional, mental health issues, a lot of times they have, from a young age, someone has come up to them who looks like a teacher or talks like a teacher or is a teacher. And in their past history, that means all the fun stuff I'm doing is going to go away and then I have work to do. And I either don't like the work or work is very difficult for me. And so I'm going to do anything I can to avoid or escape it. And then what has happened is, in the past, in their history, that work or the demand or the task has been removed, so that problem behavior has worked for them, and they're going to keep doing that. So if this is the case, one of our consequence strategies to place that behavior on extinction so it doesn't contact reinforcement is to not remove the demand. So again, we want to avoid any unnecessary dialogue, comments with the student about the behavior, remain calm with a calm, neutral voice and expression, and continue to point to what the student needs to do or vocally tell the student what he or she needs to do in very simple directives. Again, this is not the time to, talk about the behavior and use a lot of language, just very simple and direct. Okay, some more consequence strategies when the student is engaging in behaviors for avoidance or escape of non-preferred tasks. We want to avoid reminding the student about the potential reinforcer. This is so hard for teachers and staff to remember. It's not fun dealing with problem behavior, and we want to shut that problem behavior off as quickly as we can because it's very unpleasant. So oftentimes you'll see teachers or staff, once the problem behavior has started, they will remind the student about, oh, remember you're working for this, or you're not going to get your recess. That's actually reinforcing the problem behavior a little bit. So we should have used that if-then statement or the promise reinforcer prior to the problem behavior happening. Remember, those are our prevention strategies. Once the problem behavior happens, we really can't talk about those things because then we're inadvertently reinforcing the problem behavior. We want to avoid allowing contact with reinforcers during this time. Again, you might have to block. We do not bribe. You don't offer new or better reinforcers. Again, all of the talk about what they're working for, first then statements, all of that needs to happen prior to this, major problem behavior, or we're going to end up reinforcing the problem behavior. And another strategy we can use is to utilize behavioral momentum. And what that is instead of just keeping on with the same demand, you might ask a few other more simple things to build momentum and then go back to the original demand. This happens sometimes with a student who, you set out the entire math paper and that looks very daunting. And maybe we didn't, remember our prevention strategies to how to make it easier for the student. So they might start engaging in some problem behavior. Well, instead of just saying the whole thing, do the whole math paper, we may want to say, okay, well, can you just, write your name? And maybe when they write their name, they did something. Now the next one, just one. And then they do just one. Then we can reinforce a little bit. And then we can gradually build up to that whole paper. The important thing is that the demand doesn't go completely away and that we're not offering some new or better reinforcers in the middle of this problem behavior. All right, so when we are placing behavior on extinction, and remember, that means that this behavior has been reinforced in the past. So there's a history of reinforcement, and we're going to stop reinforcing it. So when placing problem behavior on extinction, things may get worse before they get better. If what a person used to do is no longer working to contact reinforcement, this will result in variations in topography, so what the behavior looks like, and magnitude, so how bad the behavior is. But then the behavior will fade if it does not contact reinforcement. So this is very important to remember. Oftentimes with some of my young kiddos, they have their first few years of life and schooling, they have used problem behavior to get out of doing things they don't want to do, and no one has used those prevention strategies to make it less likely that they want to get out of doing the things. So they've just learned what they've learned, that this works for me, then I don't have to do these hard tasks. When we first start putting that on extinction and basically not removing the demand, you will see changes in behavior. It will get worse. I've had teachers tell me, well, I can't do that because now the student started spitting, or now the student started doing this. It means what you're doing is working. You have to just stay the course, and then it will get better. A lot of times teachers will then bail on the plan, because of the new behaviors. And we're going to talk later about severe behavior and why this may not be good for those behaviors when it's unsafe. But again, at a very early age, this is critical to get this under control so that we don't have to worry about those safety issues as much as they get bigger and older. So this extinction burst is an important concept to remember. This happens with all of us. I know, if you're watching TV and you press a button on your remote control, and in your past history, every time you press the button, it works. The TV channel changes. So you continue to press the button in the same way. But the one time where you pick up the remote and you press the button and nothing happens, what do? Well, you might press the button harder. So that's a change in magnitude. And then if that doesn't work, you might start like tapping the remote control on your leg or something. I've seen people do that, or on your opposite hand, and then press the button. So that changes the topography, what your behavior looks like. You're not just pressing a button anymore. Now you're pressing it harder and tapping the remote control. Then if those things don't work, you eventually give up and you go find the batteries to replace the batteries in the remote control. So that's a little extinction burst that happens to all of us in everyday life, and problem behavior follows the same patterns. Okay, so this brings us to our ASR number 3 question. An FBA has determined that the function of problem behavior is to escape, avoid non-preferred tasks, which is socially mediated negative reinforcement. Problem behavior is not unsafe, meaning we're probably dealing with a young, small student who's not engaging in self-injury or other harmful behaviors to self or others. So the consequence section of the plan could include A, talking about the problem behavior with the student during the problem behavior, B, removing all demands, C, showing that you are upset, or D, continuing with the demands in a calm manner. Okay, and our answer is D, continuing with the demands in a calm manner. Because remember, all of those other options are could serve to accidentally reinforce the problem behavior. This is important to remember as well. For example, for students who may not be ready for a more group instruction, and they may engage in problem behavior to escape the group, by sending them to timeout during that time, you're actually reinforcing the problem behavior because they are getting away with not participating in what they're supposed to participate in. Now, again, very important, we need to look at why do they not want to be there in the first place? What can we do to prevent the problem behavior from happening? But just keep in mind, if there's a certain setting or a certain environment and the student is ready for that and they just don't want to be there and they engage in problem behavior, by giving them a timeout often means we're reinforcing the problem behavior. Now, if they are engaged in reinforcement, so they're during having, something they enjoy doing and they engage in problem behavior, then the timeout might be more appropriate, again, depending on the functioning of the student. Okay, so what if our FBA has determined that the function of problem behavior is automatic reinforcement? And remember, this means that the student is engaging in problem behavior to gain access to something or remove something, but it does not involve other people delivering the reinforcement. For example, pulling on their eyelashes or hair in all environments and conditions because they like to pull the hairs and then drop them to watch them fall. So it's not that they're doing it for attention or to get out of doing something. It's that they are providing their own reinforcement to themselves, and it's just something that they like to do. So here are some consequence strategies. If any of these behaviors are unsafe, we have to block them. So we might have to use our body, our arm, or other barriers such as mats or cushions, and again, it depends on the behavior. We need to prompt an incompatible behavior, so a response that if the student engages in it, he or she will not be able to continue engaging in the problem behavior. Then the incompatible behavior can be reinforced. Oftentimes, this can be as simple as asking the child to put something in a container. So the student is engaging in this, sometimes called self-stim or whatever it is, this automatically reinforced behavior, and you may have to block it with your hand or arm. Then you might just give the student, a piece of paper crumbled up and say, put in, and have them put in the trash can, something very simple. Okay, that stopped them from engaging in the, behavior that you don't want to see, and they also just did something you asked, so now you can reinforce. You want to be very careful not to avoid offering the student a reinforcer right after this behavior, because then they'll start to learn, oh, when I pull my eyelashes or, pull my hair, then I get a lollipop or something. You don't want to do that. What you would want to do instead is block it, then offer the incompatible response. So have them do something else with their hands, then give the other reinforcer, like the lollipop or the stuffed animal that they can pull the fur on it. So you have to put that break in there between the problem behavior and the reinforcement. You have to prompt something else, some other incompatible response. Also want to avoid commenting on the behavior, such as saying, no, don't do that, you're going to hurt yourself, or other comments. Because again, we have to be very careful not to accidentally reinforce the problem behavior with some attention. Okay, and when safety is of concern, these previous consequence strategies may not be recommended in some cases, and we will address these issues in the presentation next week. All right, so we talked about specific consequence strategies that we can use depending on the function of behavior and your student. So now we need to talk about the rate of reinforcement. So we said that we need to reinforce appropriate or replacement behaviors and lots of positive reinforcement when the student is doing what they should be doing. So there's a variety of ways to do this. You can do this based on time. So you reinforce following a certain amount of time. Based on number of responses, so you would reinforce following a certain number of responses, meaning like, okay, they did 5 math problems, they get a reinforcer, or 2 worksheets. After a set amount of time or a variable amount of time. So if you are using the time-based, it could be, okay, every half an hour, they're going to get a break with reinforcement, or it might be every 5 minutes, depending on your learner. Or it could be variable. This time it's 5 minutes of work, the next time it's 2 minutes of work, and the next time it's 8 minutes of work. You can also do the same with number of responses. So you can reinforce after a set amount of responses or a variable number of responses. So this might be after every 5 things the student does, they get a reinforcement. Or it might be sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10. That would be variable. In most cases, again, most cases, not all, it is best to reinforce on the variable schedule, particularly a variable number of responses. This, in research, has shown to lead to strong and steady responding, which is what we want. We want those good replacement appropriate behaviors to be strong and steady. If you think about all of us, we're all pretty much the same way. Those of us who work a typical Monday through Friday work week, and our reinforcement happens on Friday evening and Saturday and Sunday, so the weekend. So that is on a time schedule of reinforcement, and it's a fixed or a set amount of time. Every 5 days, it's always the same. So what does that do to our behavior? Well, you kind of see how everyone acts on Monday. No one wants to be there. No one wants to be at work. And then as the week goes on, everyone starts to perk up a little bit and gets a little better. And by Friday, everyone's in a really good mood and excited. So that's kind of what we don't want to happen with our students. We want the reinforcement to be a little more unpredictable so that they are upbeat and working and doing well because they never really know when that reinforcement is coming. So whether you use a time-based or number-based, you really want to keep it variable. So sometimes if the student's doing really well, they only have to do 2 little things and then they get a quick little break or, a Skittle or something. And they're like, wow, that's really cool. I just got something for just a little bit of work. But that's good because they did good work to get it. And that's what it teaches them. Then the next time it might go a little bit longer. So that variable time or number of responses is what's typically best for reinforcing. When you're first establishing a new appropriate behavior, it's extremely important to reinforce immediately and frequently. Then you can gradually fade the reinforcement as the student is successful. Oftentimes too, I'll hear a lot of teachers say, well, no one else in the class needs this type of reinforcement. And that is true. And that's what we will work toward with our current student who's engaging a problem behavior. But we have to start somewhere. And if starting somewhere means that, they only have to do a few things, but if they do them well and without problem behavior, we want to reinforce that. And then we will very gradually extend that as the student is successful. It's very important to remember. So now continuing with the reinforcement theme, we're going to talk about token economy systems of reinforcement. So with a token economy system of reinforcement, this is where students earn, it could be stars or check marks or smiley faces, whatever it is. Sometimes I've seen beans put in a jar. There's many different types of token economy systems of reinforcement. You can have individual ones, you can have whole group ones, whole classroom ones, and your textbook provides some excellent information on using these symptoms. I'm using these systems, not symptoms. Now, keep in mind, and I know you're going to work with a variety of different types of students of varying levels. Some students with more severe autism or other developmental disabilities, it may not be appropriate to use a token economy system of reinforcement for them, because they may need direct reinforcement at the appropriate rate, meaning they don't understand that earning these tokens leads to accessing reinforcers. So let's say, for example, a student loves the iPad, that's one of their strongest reinforcers. After they do a few minutes or a few responses, they get the iPad for a little bit of time, and then they go back to do a few more things, then back to the iPad. Because if you try to give a token to them, and for earning the iPad later, they will really have no understanding of that, and it's not going to serve as a reinforcer to them. And then it's not going to work. You're going to still see a lot of problem behavior. So very important to keep in mind the ability level of your learners. When you are starting a token system, if it is appropriate for your learner, you need to start with only 1 or 2 tokens needed to earn the reinforcer, then gradually increase once the student is successful. And we want to be very careful to increase the rate of reinforcement slowly. So again, every student is different, but for the most part, you want to teach them how to use the system with success at first. We don't want to be taking tokens away for problem behavior. You basically want to catch them being good, deliver the token, and really quickly then those tokens earn some reinforcement, and that kind of teaches them the system. And then once they're successful, we can increase the number of tokens they need to earn. Okay, some other important reminders about token economy systems. The tokens must earn the student something that he/she values or something that he or she is motivated for. So another reason that sometimes these token economy systems fail, it might be the student isn't ready for that type of reinforcement, but it could also be that the things they're working for, they really don't care about. I mean, again, we have to remember what's motivating or reinforcing for one student may not be what is motivating or reinforcing for other students. So very important to keep in mind. Also, in most cases, we want to keep the number of tokens needed to earn the reinforcer variable from session to session. And we talked about this before. That leads to strong and steady responding. It also allows more, ability for the teacher to have the token system meet the teacher's needs as you are presenting your lesson. So if you are doing, a short lesson, you can make the tokens less. If you're doing a longer lesson, then you can increase the number of tokens you need to earn. If a student is so used to a set number, like, okay, every time it's 10 tokens, then something might happen in the day where, it might be a shorter lesson, longer lesson for whatever reason. And if you have to change that, then that might cause some problem behavior, especially for some of our students who have autism, who can kind of get very set in their ways. So right from the beginning, sometimes it's 2 tokens, sometimes it's 5 tokens, sometimes it's 10 tokens. You want to keep that very variable, and the students will get used to that. And then as you gradually increase it, so then maybe it goes 5, 10, or 12. It'll be less obvious to the student that they are now working for more tokens versus if you just jump from like 2 to 10 to 20, for example. So you want to keep it variable and keep it small at first and then gradually increase it. Also very important that when we're delivering the tokens, so we're saying, you earned a check mark or a smiley face or whatever, we want to be specific with why the student earned the token. I love how you answered that question with your, appropriate voice, a nice quiet voice, or I love how you're sitting there keeping your hands to yourself, you earned a token. So we want to be very specific with the praise and the reason why we are delivering the token. Okay, so ASR number 4, our question. Which of the following is a true statement regarding token economy systems of reinforcement? A, to work, tokens must earn the student something that he or she values or something that he or she is motivated for. B, some students may not be ready for a token system. They may need direct reinforcement at the appropriate rate. C, when delivering tokens, be specific with why the student earned the token. Or D, all of the above. And the answer is D, all of the above. All of those statements were true regarding token economy systems of reinforcement. Okay, so our last section of this presentation is covering progress monitoring. So we talked about the FBA, developing the behavior plan, and all of those components the behavior plan must have. So we need to monitor to see if the plan is working. So if our intervention and our plan is not working, we need to make changes. So just like all of our other areas that we're working on with our students need progress monitoring, so does the behavior plan. So our positive behavior support plan has been developed based on the FBA. And we do want to make sure that we have provided staff training to anyone working with a student who has the behavior plan, and we will cover that in future presentations. So we need to know, is the intervention in place? Is it working? So it's very important to continue to collect data, the frequency and or duration data, and continue graphing the data to determine whether or not the plan is working. And we talked in previous presentations about the different ways you can collect frequency and duration data. We also talked about ABC data. So in this case, we really just need the frequency and duration data to see if the plan is working. If it is not working, then we need to make a change. And some possible reasons why the plan may not be working: the teachers or staff may not be following the plan consistently or with fidelity, and they may need additional training. There also could be other factors that were not considered when developing the plan, like maybe we missed something important, or maybe the FBA did not identify the correct function. Then we may need to take more antecedent behavior consequence data, the ABC data, or gather more information. So for our progress monitoring of the behavior plan, we can use the same type of data sheets that we already discussed when we were collecting the frequency duration data at the beginning. So way back at the beginning, our student is engaging in problem behavior. We needed to collect some data. We collected ABC data to determine the function, and we collected frequency and duration data. So now we shouldn't need the ABC data anymore. We just need the frequency duration data to see if the plan is working. And what other information is important to gather? Well, it should match the goals. So if our goals are to reduce problem behavior, then we want to collect data on the frequency and duration of problem behavior to see if it's being reduced. Then remember, we also have to write a goal to increase the appropriate behaviors. So let's say that we have a student who, has difficulty making transitions, and we're teaching them the replacement skill of appropriately making transitions. We would need to collect data on their transitions through the day, and are they engaging in problem behavior during those or successful? For example, another student, maybe math is really hard for them, and so they're engaging in problem behavior to avoid or escape math class. So not only do we want data on the problem behavior, we also want our data on math skills, because we're probably going to be teaching a replacement behavior of not only complying with the teacher directions, but also if math is what's difficult, then they might need some remediation in math so it won't be so frustrating for them. So then we would need data on how well they're doing in math class. So that data should match the goals. And we want to graph the data regularly, and this is very important. That allows for a very quick analysis of if it's working or not. So when you look at a graph of data, if the trend of the graph is going downward, then your intervention or plan is likely working. If the trend is upward, then the intervention or plan is not working, and we'll definitely need to make a change. Maybe there's more staff training that needs done. Maybe we need more ABC data to determine a different function, or maybe the behavior is multiply controlled. That means having more than one function. There also may be some medical issues to consider that we didn't think about before or realize before. And also, if there's no trend, if the data is very variable, so a lot of variability in the data, meaning up or down all over the place. You can look for any patterns. Also look at staff training, possibly gathering more ABC data, because the problem behavior may be serving multiple functions, and you want to roll out any medical issues. So pretty much, unless the graph is low level staying flat, but it's down low or on the downward trend, then the plan is not working. If it's low levels and maintaining low levels, or if it's going downward, then your plan is likely working. Okay, ASR number 5, our question. When looking at a graph of frequency data for problem behavior, if the trend of the data is downward, then you can determine that A, the intervention plan needs to be adjusted. B, the intervention plan is likely not working. C, the intervention plan is likely working. Or D, you need to collect more ABC data. And the answer is C, the intervention plan is likely working if that the data path on the graph is showing a downward or decreasing trend. Okay, so we're going to look at a few examples of problem behavior graphs. So here you can see a graph of frequency of problem behavior. And this student, the levels, I think it looks like there were maybe 2 problem behaviors on the 3rd, and then 1, and then down to 0. And it has maintained at 0 levels for a full week, and then 3 days in the previous week. So I think it's safe to say that so far this intervention plan looks like it is working. Okay, so here is a very different looking graph, and you can see on this graph that they are collecting frequency and as well as duration. So on the left x-axis the left y-axis going up is the frequency, and on the right y-axis going up is the duration. And you can see the x's. I hope it's visible there to you. Then in February, you can really see those x's going up, so problem behavior was definitely increasing. Then at the beginning of the next month, you start to see it go down a little bit, and then you can see a phase change line there, and it says team meeting new procedures. So the teacher marked right on the graph that on that date, they put in place their new procedures and had a meeting with the team, so hopefully everyone was on the same page. Then you can see after that line where they put that in March there, duration is down slightly and kind of a downward trend if you put an imaginary line from the beginning of March to where the graph ended. Now, next week, you might see those numbers go up again. That will be a lot of variability in the data, and that means that something needs to be done. ABC data or more training or something. But as of now, it looks like it's downward trending for the duration data, but again, we'd have to see what the next week looks like. Whenever you see a lot of variability like this, you want more time of consistent data, like decreasing, to actually prove that it's working. Okay, so for this student, again, this graph is showing 2 different types of data. So the solid dots, which are indicated by the solid dots, that is for the student engages in very loud clapping noises with their hands, and also engages in licking behavior, so licking different things. And then the other behaviors of concern, we call them kind of like a tics, but it's all of those things listed because, again, we want to define our behaviors, but it makes, for data collection purposes, it's easier just to call it tics. But we know that it means arm flaps, chin to shoulder, vocal tics, snapping fingers, and rolling eyes back. So it's a lot of things that go on with this, and it was very much interfering with his learning. And it was kind of unsafe because he was really forcefully hitting his chin off his shoulder. So that was indicated with the X. So you can see on this graph, it is really clear that the clapping and licking behavior is at 0 levels and staying at 0 levels. So we can very readily say that the behavior plan in place for this student for those behaviors is working. And you can also see that the behavior plan in place for the other behaviors is not working. There's a ton of variability in that data. It's down, then it spikes up, then it's up and down, and so on. So that lets us know that we definitely need to look at those behaviors more closely and figure out what is the function and then determine a better plan.